Hi, I'm Susan Rutledge, and this is part 2 of creating look-alike Doodle Art seamless pattern brushes in Adobe Illustrator. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make the rest of these pattern brushes that you see on the screen. We've already created the first 5, and we did that in part 1, which you see here. So now let's get on with those final 6. I'm going to open up a document which I've already created, and I'm going to use the Ellipse Tool, which is keyboard shortcut L. I'll click on the artboard to open up the Ellipse dialog box, and then I'm going to type in 3 inches for the width, press the Tab key, and type in 6 inches for the height, and then I'll say OK. And then I'll get the Selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and move our oval into the center of the artboard. Next, I'll get the Rectangle tool, keyboard shortcut M, and I'm going to draw it right across the center of my ellipse. I'm going to come up to View first, and I'm going to click on Smart Guides, which is also keyboard shortcut Command U. When I have Smart Guides turned on, Illustrator helps me find the anchors and the centers of objects. So I like to always have Smart Guides turned on. So I'm going to draw out a rectangle, and the top of the rectangle is intersecting the center of the oval. Then I'll get the Selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and select both of these objects. Next, I'll use the Shape Builder tool, which is located on the left toolbar. And it looks like this right here. If you don't see this, you may not have all of your tools showing. You can click on this little ellipsis at the bottom of the toolbar and come over to the top right corner and click on this little icon, and you can check. And if you have basic checked, just check advanced. And now we'll move back over into this toolbar, and this again is the Shape Builder tool. It's keyboard shortcut Shift M. When this tool is active, you can see this little plus sign next to my black arrow. And if I hold my mouse down and drag across objects, Illustrator is going to join them together. But that's not what I want to do in this instance, so I'm going to undo that, keyboard shortcut Command Z. And I'm going to press the Option key down. When I do that, my plus sign changes to a minus, and now I can drag over the objects that I don't want, and when I release my mouse, Illustrator is going to delete them. Now I'll get the Direct Selection tool, keyboard shortcut A, and I'm going to hold down my Shift key and select the bottom left anchor and the bottom right anchor. And then with those selected, I'll let up on the Shift key, and I'm going to drag this bottom line straight down. And I'm going to press that Shift key down again now so that I draw down in a straight vertical line. I'm going to drag this down about 1/2 inch. You can see the measurement with the little gray box that's next to my arrow. And once I get there, I'll release my mouse. Now I'm going to come over to the left toolbar, and behind the Pen tool, if I press and hold that down, I have a pop-up menu, and I'm going to get the Anchor Point tool, which is keyboard shortcut Shift C, and I'll click on this top anchor. And then I'll get the Selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and I'm going to just click on the artboard to deselect that. Next, I'll get the Line Segment tool, keyboard shortcut \, and I'll move to the top anchor, and I'm going to hold down my Shift key and drag straight down until my bottom anchor intersects with the bottom of my object, and then I'll release my mouse, and I'll get the Selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and click on the artboard to deselect that. Now select the Line Segment tool again, keyboard shortcut \, and I'm going to click on the artboard to open up the Line Segment tool options dialog box. And I'm going to type in 3 for the length, and I'm going to type in 45 degrees for the angle, and then I'll just say OK. Now I'm going to move this diagonal line, and I'm going to place it on top of the object so that it overlaps the center line and the right side of the object, but I'm going to drag it straight down until I'm sort of leaving a little bit of the corner there. Now we're going to hold down the Shift and the Option key and drag this line up, and we're going to drag it up a 1/2 inch. And again, I'm looking at the little gray box that is telling me how far I've gone up. And then I'll release my mouse and I'll leave this selected, and I'll duplicate the move using the keyboard shortcut Command D, Command D, Command D, and I just keep pressing that until I get up to the top. And then I'm going to get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V. And if I like the spacing and feel like it is even at the top and the bottom, I can leave it like that. If I don't, I'll hold down my Shift key and I'm going to select each of the diagonal lines. Make sure you don't get your object. I'll group those, keyboard shortcut Command G, and then I can use my up and down arrows and I can just adjust that spacing. And when I'm happy with that, I'll select the object along with those lines just by lassoing over all of them. And I'm going to get the Shape Builder tool again, keyboard shortcut Shift M, and hold down the Option key to delete all of the lines that are on the outside of the object and that are along the bottom. And then I'll click on each one of these lines that is hanging over the center line. Now I'll get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and we have all of our angled lines in place. Next, we're going to use the Blob tool, and that's keyboard shortcut Shift B. And you can see when I kind of move my paintbrush around the size of the blob there on the edge of the paintbrush. And I'd like it to be a little bit bigger, so I'm going to press down on the right bracket key. And each time I press down, it makes it a little bit bigger. And you can just kind of use your judgment on how big you want your blob, and if you like that, leave it, or you can undo it, keyboard shortcut Command Z, and press the right bracket a couple more times to make it bigger. And then I'm going to click and just randomly place some dots. There's no right or wrong way to do this, just I want it just sort of evenly spaced. And once I have several dots on there, I'll get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and I'll move them around a little bit until I have them sort of where I want them. Then I'll select all of the lines in the objects and group them using the keyboard shortcut Command G. And I want to resize this before we place this in the brushes panel. So I'll come up to Object, Transform, Scale, and I'm going to scale this to 25%. And I don't want to scale the strokes and effects, so I'm going to remove that option and say OK. And then I'll click on the artboard to just look at this. And I think that's going to work fine. So I'll move it up out of the way, and we will open the brushes panel, and we can drag and drop it into the brushes panel, choose pattern brush, and say OK. And I'm going to name this Dots and Stripes Leaf and say OK. And then let's get the Ellipse tool, keyboard shortcut L, and drag out an ellipse. I'm going to go to the Properties panel and remove that fill color, and then come back to the Brushes panel and choose the Dots and Stripes Leaf and apply it to my stroke. Then I'll get the Selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and we have a really nice seamless pattern brush here. I'm going to select this and delete it. Now we're going to use some similar tools to start out for our next leaf pattern. I'll get the Ellipse tool, keyboard shortcut L, and click on the artboard to open up that ellipse dialog box. I'll type in 3 inches for the width, tab down, and 6 inches for the height, and say OK, and get the Selection tool, keyboard shortcut V. Then we'll get that rectangle tool again, keyboard shortcut M, and draw once again over the center of the ellipse, and get the Selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, select both objects, and get the Shape Builder tool, keyboard shortcut Shift M, and hold down the Option key and remove the lower half of these objects. Now we're going to come back over to the left toolbar and get that anchor point tool, keyboard shortcut Shift-C, and click on the top anchor. Now get the direct selection tool, keyboard shortcut A, and I'm going to click one time on the artboard to deselect all of those anchors, and instead I'm going to click on the bottom left and hold down the Shift key and click on the bottom right. And then I'm momentarily releasing the Shift key so that I can grab this bottom line and begin to drag down. Now I'm going to hold down the Shift key so that I drag in a straight line, and I'm going to drag down. Let's go to 0.65 inches and release the mouse. Now go to Object, Path, Offset Path, and we're going to do an offset of minus 0.2 inches and say OK. And then I'll get the rectangle tool, keyboard shortcut M, and I'm going to draw a rectangle that intersects with the bottom of the smaller object. We're going to just drag this across so that it intersects there, and then get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and I'll select all of the objects, get the shape builder tool again, keyboard shortcut Shift M, and hold the Option key down and drag over the rectangle and the bottom part of my leaf pattern, and I'm left with one solid line across the bottom. Now I'll get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and click on the artboard to deselect these objects. Before we start, I'm going to zoom in. I'll use the zoom tool, which is keyboard shortcut Z, and just make that really big, and then get the pen tool, keyboard shortcut P, and I'm going to open the properties panel, and I'll leave the stroke at 1 point. And I'll just draw across and angle my line up just slightly, and then I'm dragging so that I have a little bit of an arch here. And then I'm going to get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and I'm going to take this little arch which I've created, and I'm going to actually lower it just a little bit. Then I'm going to hold the Option key down and drag it up, and I'm dragging up about 0.2, 0.22, somewhere around in there. I'll speed this up, and I'm going to copy these all the way up the right side. I'll hold down the Option key and just continue to copy these, and I'm not going to worry about being real accurate right now. I'll come back with the selection tool and also use my arrow keys to get these placed where I want them. And when I'm finished, I'll select the objects and these lines, and then I'll hold down the Shift key and I'll click on my original objects. And when I'm holding the Shift key down, that's actually allowing me to deselect these and keep these little lines that I drew with my pen tool selected. And then I'll group these with the keyboard shortcut Command G. Next, with these selected, I'll come to the left toolbar, and I'm going to use the Reflect tool. And you may be seeing the Rotate tool on your toolbar. That's this little circular arrow. But if you press down on it, there's a pop-out menu, and you can choose the Reflect tool, which is keyboard shortcut O. Now once it's selected, I'm going to double click on it, and you can see that my lines did something crazy, and don't worry about that. Illustrator remembers the last time I used the Reflect tool, and it's just kept that angle in here. But if I come back over here and I choose vertical, then Illustrator is going to put those lines where I want them. But I need to be sure and press copy, because I don't want to lose the original lines. Now I'll get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V. I'll hold the Shift key down as I drag over so that I can get these placed on the left side, and it moves them straight across. Now I'm going to click on the artboard to deselect. I think I'm going to select these and arrow over just one more time here. And then I'll get my line segment tool, keyboard shortcut backslash, and I'm going to draw a line right up here from anchor to anchor at the top. And then get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and I'll select all of these objects and my lines, and I'm going to group everything together using the keyboard shortcut Command G. And then we're going to reduce the size of this. So we'll come over to Object, Transform, Scale, and I'll do 40% here. And I'll say OK, and look at that. I think that's going to look just fine. So let's resize the artboard, keyboard shortcut Command 0, and open up the Brushes panel. We'll drag and drop this design in and choose Pattern Brush and say OK. And we'll call this Lined Border Leaf and say OK. And then I'll move this up out of the way. And we'll get the Ellipse tool again, keyboard shortcut L, drag out our ellipse and choose our Lined Border Leaf. And get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and we have another seamless pattern brush. And I can select this and come to the properties panel and reduce the size of that pattern brush by reducing the size of the stroke. And it remains seamless no matter whether I reduce it or I increase the size. And you can increase the size really large and you're not going to lose any quality because Illustrator has created this as vector art. All right, I'm going to delete this, and our next pattern is going to be dots. So I'll use the Ellipse tool again, and I'll click on the artboard, and that opens up the ellipse dialog box, and I'm going to type in a 1/2 inch and tab down and type in a 1/2 inch again. That's going to give me one perfect circle, and it's got a 2-point stroke. I'm going to fill that with a black fill, and then I'm going to click on the artboard again, and this time I'm going to type in 0.25, tab down and 0.25 to make it a circle, and say OK. Then I'll get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, select both of these circles and come over to the properties panel under Align, and I'll press on this second to the last icon, vertical align the center. Then I'll click on the artboard to deselect the circles, but go back and select the small circle, hold down the Shift key and drag it where I want it next to the big circle. Now we're going to select both the big circle and the little circle and hold down the Shift and the Option key to duplicate these. And I'm letting Smart Guides show me when I have equal spacing here. Now I'll get the Line Segment tool, keyboard shortcut \, and I'm going to draw a 2-point line that goes right across the center of all of these circles. So I'll hold down the Shift key, and that allows me to draw a horizontal line. Now I'll get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and deselect my line and move into the outline viewing mode, keyboard shortcut Command Y. And I move into the outline mode because we're going to create a bounding box, and I can be more precise and see exactly where the centers are of my objects when I'm in this mode. Now, a bounding box is an invisible rectangle that we use to tell Illustrator how to place the design in the pattern brush so that it ends up being seamless. So we're going to get the rectangle tool, keyboard shortcut M, and I've got to make sure there's no fill, and I have to remove the stroke. And I want you to remember that I deselected my last object, which was that line, before I did this, because if I removed the fill color here, I wouldn't see it because I'm in the outline viewing mode, but I would have actually taken the stroke color off of that stroke which I just created. So I have the rectangle tool active, and I'm going to make a bounding box now that cuts the two big circles in half. So I'll start on the top left, and you can see that I'm lined up with the center, and I have that top anchor, and I'll drag down and to the right, and I'm going to catch the bottom of the circles and come over to the center of that second big circle and release my mouse. Now I have to place the bounding box behind the design so that Illustrator recognizes it as a bounding box. And I use the keyboard shortcut Shift Command left bracket to do that. Now I'll get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V. I can select the little circle on the right and delete it, and then I'm going to select everything else and I'll group it, keyboard shortcut Command G. Now Illustrator is only going to use this area that is in the bounding box, and it's going to repeat one after another. So let's move back into the preview mode. Keyboard shortcut Command Y, and I'm going to recenter the artboard, keyboard shortcut Command 0. I'm going to remove the lines on the outside here. I'll get the direct selection tool, keyboard shortcut A. I'll click on that left anchor, hold the shift key down and move it to the left circle, and then do the same thing on the right. I'll click that right anchor, hold the shift key down and move it over into the right circle. Now I'll get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and select all of my objects and open the brushes panel, and I'll drag and drop the design into the brushes panel, choose pattern brush, say OK, and I'm going to name this circles and say OK. The reason I chose to use this bounding box is so that I could have an evenly spaced design. So when I use an object like a rectangle, which is keyboard shortcut M, that has outside corners, Illustrator will actually auto-generate a really nice corner tile for me. If you want more information about corner tiles, I have an entire video on that subject. But let's go ahead and choose the circles pattern brush and get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and you can see that I have this nice corner here with a circle centered right at the edge of the corner. And I could have done a small circle, big circle, small circle if I wanted a big circle in the center. I'm going to move over to the properties panel and select my rectangle, and I'm going to reduce the size of this to 0.25 because I think that really makes a nice looking pattern brush. Now we'll delete this item. And we're going to turn our grids on in the properties panel for this next pattern brush. And I want snap to grid turned on, so I'll click on this center icon here. Now I'll get the pen tool, keyboard shortcut P, and I'm going to be using these darker grid lines, and I'll press in the center of this line on the left, and I'm going to drag down to the center of the bottom and just click one time and then get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V. Now this is my starting anchor here because it's where I started to draw the line. I'll come over to the word stroke, and you can see that there's a dotted line under it, which means I can click on it and it's going to open something up. In this instance, this is the stroke dialog box. And down in this area here, I have arrowheads I can choose. The left bin is for the starting anchor, and the right bin is for the end anchor. We want to add a little dot on top of the starting anchor, so I'm going to twirl down here, and I'm going to choose number 21. Next, I'll click on the artboard to close out this dialog box, and then I'm going to grab hold of my line and hold down both the Shift and the Option keys, and that allows me to make an exact copy and drag to the right in a perfectly horizontal line, and then I'm going to make sure I have 4 complete little squares between my circles and release my mouse. But while my line is still selected, I want to duplicate that move, so I'll use the keyboard shortcut Command D, and then once again Command D. Now I'll select all 4 of these lines and group them, keyboard shortcut Command G, and then we're going to mirror these. We'll come over to the left toolbar. That reflect tool should still be showing. I'm going to click once to activate it and then double click it so that it opens up the reflect dialog box. And I want for the reflection to be horizontal, so I'll click horizontal and then be sure to choose copy and get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and I'll hold the shift key down so that I drag and keep this in a straight line. Now I'll get the line segment tool, keyboard shortcut backslash, and I'm going to come just 1 square to the left of this big square here, and I'll hold down my Shift key so that I can drag in a straight line, and I'm going to drag out farther than I know I'm going to need, and I'll get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V. Now I'll select the entire group, and I'm going to resize these. I'll come up to Object, Transform, Scale. I'll scale this down to 50%. This is a uniform scale, and say OK. And then turn my rulers on, keyboard shortcut Command R, and then I'll hold the Shift and the Option keys down, and I'm going to drag to the right. This allows me to make an exact copy and to drag it perfectly horizontal to the right. Then I'll release my mouse, and this looks like it would be the right spacing. So I'll drag out a guide from the left toolbar, and I'm going to center it right over where that anchor is. And this shows me exactly where the right side of the repeat needs to be marked. I'll release my mouse, and then I can delete this copy. I'll click on this and press the delete key, and it wasn't grouped, so I've got to select each of these and delete them. And then I'm going to get the direct selection tool, keyboard shortcut A, and click on this right anchor and hold the Shift key down so that it moves right in line, and I'm going to stop when it intersects with my guide, and then I'll get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and select my guide and delete that. Now select the design, and I'm going to group it, keyboard shortcut Command G, and open the brushes panel, and I'll drag and drop the design in and choose pattern brush and say OK. And I'm going to name this one Stitches, and we'll say OK. Move this up out of the way and get the ellipse tool, keyboard shortcut L, and drag out an ellipse, and let's see what our Stitches pattern brush looks like. The spacing is perfect, and we have another seamless pattern brush. I love this one, especially when it's smaller. So I'm going to reduce the stroke size to 1/2 inch, and it reminds me of a vintage quilt stitch. So we've completed now number 4. Let's delete it, and we'll make our next design, which is leaves on a stem. I'm going to use the ellipse tool, keyboard shortcut L, and I'll click on the artboard to open up the ellipse dialog box. I'll type in 4 inches for the width, tab down, and type in 2 inches for the height, and say OK. I'll get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and I can turn off our grid now and turn off the snap to grid. I'm going to come over to the left toolbar, and under the pen tool, I'll click here, and we'll get that anchor point tool again, keyboard shortcut Shift C, and I'll click on the left anchor and the right anchor. And then I'll get the line segment tool, keyboard shortcut \, and I'll start with the left anchor and hold my Shift key down and drag over to the right anchor and release my mouse. And I'm going to get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and my artboard moved. I'm going to recenter that, keyboard shortcut Command 0. Now I'm going to select all of these items here, and I'm going to increase the stroke to 1 point. I'll group these, keyboard shortcut Command G, and I'm going to reduce the size of our leaf. I'll come up to Object, Transform, Scale, and I want a uniform scale, and I'm going to type in 25% and say OK. Now I'm going to rotate this using the Rotate tool, keyboard shortcut R, and right now the rotate ball is in the center, but I'm going to hold down the Option key, and I'm going to click on the left anchor. That moves the rotate ball to the left anchor, and it opens up the rotate dialog box. I'm going to type in 45 degrees, and then I'm going to say OK. Now I'll get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and we're going to reflect this leaf. I'll come over to the left toolbar, and I'm going to press and hold on the rotate tool, and that brings out a pop-up menu, and I can choose reflect tool, which is keyboard shortcut O. And then I'm going to double click on the reflect tool. I'm going to click on horizontal and then copy. Next, I'll get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V. I'll hold down the Shift key, and I'm going to drag this copy until the anchors intersect. And then I'll get that line segment tool, keyboard shortcut backslash, and I'll hold down the Shift key so that I can drag out a horizontal line. Now I'll get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and I'm going to select my two leaves. I'll group them, keyboard shortcut Command G, and then hold down the Shift and the Option keys, and I'll make a copy. And I want to make sure I have a good little space in between these edges, and then I'll duplicate that one more time, keyboard shortcut Command D. Now I'm going to grab all of these and move them to the left and group them, keyboard shortcut Command G. Then I'll hold down the Shift and the Option keys, and I'm going to drag to the right until it looks like I have the spacing about right. And once I'm happy with that, I'll come over and grab a guide and I'll place it right over that anchor point, and then get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and select the copy and delete it. And it just so happens that I picked the placement exactly right. That just almost never happens. Normally I'd have to get the direct selection tool, keyboard shortcut A, and grab that right anchor and arrow it over until it intersected with the guide. But I lucked out this time, so I'm just going to select this guide and delete it. And then I'll select the entire design. I want to resize this. I'll go up to Object, Transform, and Scale. Now I'm going to move this out of the way and take a look. I think I'm going to do 35% here, and I don't have scale corners or scale strokes and effects checked. I'll say OK. That looks like a pretty good size. I'll open up the brushes panel and drag and drop the design in. I'll choose pattern brush and say OK, and we're just going to call this leaves and say OK. Move this out of the way, and I'll get the ellipse tool, keyboard shortcut L, drag out an ellipse, and choose my leaf pattern. And that looks really nice. Okay, let's delete this, and we have one more, and this is the most complex one that we're going to have. I'll start out just drawing a straight horizontal line. I'll get the line segment tool, keyboard shortcut backslash, and hold my Shift key down so that my line is straight. Now I'll open the properties panel, and I want my stroke to be 2 points. Now I'm going to use the spiral tool, and the spiral tool is a really neat tool. It hides behind this line segment tool. So if I press and hold this down, I have a pop-up menu, and we're going to choose spiral tool. And when I press down on my mouse and I drag, I'm able to make a spiral, and I can move it around. I can make whatever angle I want, and if I want more circles in the spiral, I press the up arrow, and if I want fewer, I'm going to press the down arrow. Now, when I have it the size that I want it, I can keep it that way but move around with it if I hold down the space bar. So I'm holding down the space bar, and I like the way this spiral looks. So I'm going to release my mouse, and I'm going to come over to the left toolbar. The reflect tool is showing. I'll select it once and then double click it, and we want a horizontal reflection and make this a copy. So now I'll get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and hold that Shift key down so that it moves straight down. And when my copy intersects with the line, I'm going to release my mouse. I'm going to use the pen tool, keyboard shortcut P. I'll click once with my mouse, and then I'm going to come down to that intersection and click again. And get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V. This is my starting anchor, and this is my starting anchor. So I have both of these selected. I'll come over, press on stroke, and we're going to come down to the arrowhead bends again and twirl down and choose 21 one more time. Click on the artboard to deselect it, and I'm going to click on this copy right here. Now I'll come back over to the left toolbar, and I'll click once on the reflect tool to activate it, and then double click it, and we want this to reflect horizontally. So I'll click horizontal, and then I'll click copy. Now I'll get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and hold the Shift key down and drag until that line intersects with these other lines. Now quickly I'm going to use the Ellipse Tool, keyboard shortcut L, and I'll just drag out a little oval, and I'm eyeballing this, and then I'll get the Line Segment Tool, keyboard shortcut backslash, and I'll hold down the Shift key, and I'm going to just drag from the top anchor to the bottom anchor and get the Selection Tool, keyboard shortcut V, select both objects, and we'll group them, keyboard shortcut Command G. Now we're going to rotate this leaf slightly, so I'm going to get the Rotate tool, keyboard shortcut R. I press one time to get the tool. Now I'm going to hold down the Option key and I'm going to click that bottom anchor, and that brings up the Rotate dialog box, and I'm going to type in 33 degrees here, and I'll say OK, and then get the Selection tool, and I'll drag this to where it intersects with this baseline. Now we're going to reflect this leaf, so we come back over, and I have the Rotate tool showing now, so I've got to press down and hold to bring up the Reflect tool, and then we just double click on that to open up that Reflect dialog box again, and horizontal is checked, but we need to make sure and make a copy. Get the Selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and I'll hold the Shift key down and drag it until it intersects. Now you can choose how far this design is going to be from the repeat by how long you leave this stem. I'm going to get the Direct Selection tool, keyboard shortcut A, and select that right anchor and hold my Shift key down. Then I'll drag it to the left until my leaves are just about centered. And I think I want to reduce the size of this a little bit, so I'm going to select all the objects. I'll group them, keyboard shortcut Command G, and then come up to Object, Transform, Scale. Let's do 25%, and I'm going to leave the Scale Strokes and Effects checked and say OK. Now I'll open the Brushes panel, and I need to get the Selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and then drag and drop this design in and choose Pattern Brush and say OK. And I'm going to just name this one Floral and say OK. And we'll move this up out of the way and get the Ellipse tool, keyboard shortcut L, and choose our new pattern brush. And you can see that looks really nice and it is seamless. So now I've shown you how to make the other 6 designs that make up our look-alike Doodle Art brushes. In the next video, I'll show you how to take these designs and these pattern brushes and create those really popular color sheets that you're seeing all over the place. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, be sure and do so right now while you're thinking about it so you don't miss a single episode. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye now.